I remember the exact moment I understood my own family thought I'd lived too long. It wasn't a shout. It wasn't a slammed door. It was a Sunday afternoon in October, the kind where the light comes in low and gold through the kitchen window, and I was sitting at my workbench in the garage fixing the chain on my granddaughter's bicycle, the way I'd fixed 100 bicycles for 100 grandkids over 40 years of being somebody's father. My hands still worked fine for that kind of thing, even if my knees complained on the stairs now. I heard the side door open. I heard footsteps, more than one set, and I looked up to find my son Daniel standing there, and behind him, my daughter Rachel, and behind her, my daughter-in-law Michelle, and my nephew Tyler, who I hadn't seen in months, and two of my grandkids hovering by the door like they didn't want to be there but had been told to come anyway. Nobody was smiling. My son had a folder in his hands. A folder. Like I was about to be handed a performance review. I set down the wrench. "What's this?" I said. "Somebody die." Nobody laughed. Daniel cleared his throat the way he always does before he says something he's rehearsed. He's 44 now, runs a logistics company 2 states over, wears the kind of watch that costs more than my first car. He's a good talker. Always has been. Even as a boy, he could talk his way out of a broken window. "Dad," he said, "we need to sit down and have a family conversation. All of us." And I looked at Rachel. She's my soft one, or she used to be. She was studying the concrete floor of the garage like it had something written on it. "About what?" I said. It talked then. About the house," Michelle said. "She's never liked me much, my daughter-in-law, and she's never bothered pretending otherwise. About what happens next." I stood up slow, the way you do at 68 when your body reminds you it's 68, and I wiped my hands on the rag hanging from my belt loop. "Next for what?" I said. "I'm not going anywhere. I built this house." "That's kind of the point, Dad," Daniel said. They walked me into the living room like I was the one being escorted somewhere, not them. My wife, Carol, was already sitting on the couch, and when I came in she didn't get up, didn't reach for my hand the way she always used to when I walked into a room. She just sat there with her fingers laced together in her lap, looking at some spot on the wall past my shoulder. 41 years married to that woman. I knew every version of her face. I did not recognize this one. "Carol," I said, "what's going on?" "Sit down, Frank," she said quietly. "Please?" I sat. My whole family arranged itself around that living room like they'd done this before, like they'd practiced where to stand. Rachel, perched on the arm of the love seat. Tyler leaned against the doorframe with his arms crossed, looking like he wished he was anywhere else. My 2 grandkids, Ben and Ava, stood near the hallway, staring at their phones, not because they were bored but because they didn't want to look at me. Daniel opened the folder. Inside were sheets of paper, printed, official-looking, with lines at the bottom for signatures. My stomach went cold before he even said a word. "We've been talking," Daniel said, "about your situation, about the house being too much for you, about the fact that you're 68 and living alone in a 5-bedroom house that you can barely maintain, and Mom's not getting any younger either, and we all think, this isn't just me, that it's time to talk about assisted living, and about what happens to the house." I looked at the papers in his hands. I looked at my wife, who still wouldn't meet my eyes. "You brought paperwork," I said, "to tell me you want to put me in a home." "It's not a home, Dad, it's a community." "You brought paperwork," I said again, quieter this time, because my voice was starting to shake and I didn't want it to. Rachel finally looked up. "Dad, we love you. This isn't about not loving you. It's about being realistic. You had that fall in the driveway in March. Mom called me crying. Quote, she didn't know what to do. We can't keep doing this from 3 states away, wondering if you're okay." "I twisted my ankle," I said. "I didn't die. This time," Michelle said, and I felt something in my chest go tight and mean because she said it like she was hoping for a different outcome next time. Daniel set the folder down on the coffee table. On top was a form with the letterhead of some retirement community I'd never heard of, and below it, Another set of papers I recognized instantly, because I'd drawn them up myself 20 years ago with a lawyer named Sol Bergman who's been dead for a decade now. The deed to the house. We think the fairest thing, Daniel said, is to put it to a vote. All of us. Whether you should keep living here alone, or whether it's time to sign the house over into a family trust and move somewhere safer. We already had Mom talk to a realtor. We're not trying to steamroll you, Dad. We just want everyone to have a say. And Pappas. A vote. I sat there in my own living room, in the house I had built with my own hands over 3 summers back when Daniel was still in diapers, laying the foundation myself because I couldn't afford a contractor, and I listened to my son tell me that my life, my home, my right to exist in the space I had made, was now a matter to be decided by committee. Do I get a vote? I said. Daniel and Rachel exchanged a look. It was Michelle who answered. This isn't really about what you want, Frank. It's about what's safe. Sometimes people can't see clearly when it's about themselves. I turned to Carol, 41 years. I had held that woman's hand in a hospital room twice, when Daniel was born and when Rachel was born, and once more when her own mother passed and she cried into my shoulder until 3 in the morning. Carol, I said, say something. She looked at me then, finally, and her eyes were wet, but she didn't reach for me. They're worried about you, Frank, she whispered. I'm worried about you. Just let them explain. And explain how you're voting on whether I get to stay in my own house, I said, and my voice cracked on the last word, and I hated myself for that crack. Nobody's kicking you out, Daniel said. Too smooth, too rehearsed. And I understood in that moment that he had practiced this speech in a mirror somewhere, maybe in his car on the drive over, working out how to make betrayal sound like love. We're just voting on what's best for the family, for your safety, for Mom's peace of mind. Mom's peace of mind. He handed slips of paper to Rachel, who started passing them around the room. Small slips, the kind you'd use for a raffle. Carol took one without looking at me. Tyler took one and wouldn't meet my eyes. Even my grandkids, 16 and 14 years old, reached out and took their slips like it was the most normal thing in the world to be asked to vote on their grandfather's right to his own home. Simple yes or no, Daniel said. Yes, Dad stays in the house as is. No, we move forward with the trust and the community. Majority rules. We fold them, we put them in the bowl, nobody discusses their vote out loud. I sat in my armchair, and I watched my family, my wife, my children, my grandchildren, people I had fed and clothed and driven to school and paid for, and loved with everything I had in me line up at my own coffee table to decide whether I still belonged in the life I'd spent 40 years building. The sound of paper folding. The soft thud of slips dropping into a ceramic bowl that Carol and I had bought on our honeymoon in Savannah of all things 41 years ago. I remember thinking, absurdly, that they were using our honeymoon souvenir as a ballot box. Ava, my granddaughter, was the last one. She looked at me with tears already running down her face, mouthed the word sorry, and dropped her slip in anyway. She didn't have the courage to just say no to her father. None of them did. Daniel gathered the bowl and walked into the kitchen to count. I sat there in the silence, listening to the faint rustle of paper through the doorway, and it felt like listening to my own eulogy being drafted in the next room. He came back 4 minutes later. 4 minutes that felt like 4 hours. It was close, he said, but the family's decided you can stay in the house for now. We'll revisit in 6 months. Levinine, he said it like a mercy, like he was doing me a favor by not throwing me out of my own life on the spot. I didn't say thank you. I didn't say anything. Carol came and put her hand on my shoulder and said, "See, Frank, they want you here." And I remember thinking that want was the wrong word. Entirely. They had tolerated me. They had put my worth to a vote, and the vote had barely gone my way, and everyone in that room was going to go home tonight and sleep just fine, and I was going to lie awake until sunrise wondering how a man spends his whole life pouring himself into people only to become, in the end, a line item they debate. The next 2 months were the strangest of my life, and one. Nobody mentioned the vote again. Carol made dinner like always. Daniel called on Sundays, like always. And won. The vote, Ivan, and won. Everyone acted like nothing had happened, like they hadn't sat in my living room and weighed my humanity against a real estate listing. But I knew I carried it in my chest like a stone I couldn't put down. I knew who had voted against me, even though I never looked in that bowl, because I could see it in the way certain people wouldn't quite look at me anymore. I had 2 months to decide what to do, and I want to tell you, I thought about fighting. I thought about calling a lawyer, drawing lines, making it clear this was still my house and my name on the deed and nobody was voting me out of my own life. But somewhere in those 2 months, something shifted in me. I stopped wanting to fight them. I started wanting to show them. And Christmas morning came cold and clear, the kind of blue sky cold we get here in December, frost thick on the porch railings. Everybody gathered at the house the way they always did. Daniel and Michelle and their kids, Rachel and her husband Tyler and his new girlfriend Carol bustling around the kitchen pretending, like the rest of them, that October had never happened. The tree was up, the stockings were hung. It looked, from the outside, exactly like every Christmas we'd ever had. But I knew it was a performance now. I watched them open presents and laugh their bright, careful laughter. And I understood that every one of them was trying very hard to convince themselves they hadn't done anything wrong. When it came time for the family gift exchange, the one where everybody gathers by the fireplace and takes turns, Rachel clapped her hands and said, "Dad, you first. What'd you bring this year?" I had exactly one gift. A plain cardboard box wrapped in brown paper, no bow, nothing fancy. I'd wrapped it myself at the kitchen table the night before, alone, after everyone had gone to bed. I handed it to Daniel since he'd been the one to bring the folder in October, and I thought it was only right he'd be the one to open this. "What is this, a brick?" He laughed, testing the weight of it. "Feels heavy, old man." "Open it," I said. My voice was steady. I had rehearsed this moment in my head every night for 2 months, lying awake, staring at the ceiling. He tore the paper. Inside was a plain document box, the kind you'd get from an office supply store. He lifted the lid and pulled out a stack of papers. I watched his face change in real time, watched the smile drain out of it the way water drains from a tub. Deeds, the house, my retirement accounts, cashed out and reassigned. The title, to my truck. Every account, every asset, every dollar and brick and blade of grass I owned, signed over in a trust to them. All of it. "What is this?" Daniel whispered, staring at the papers like they might catch fire in his hands. "It's everything," I said. "You wanted to vote on whether I get to stay. Well, congratulations. You don't have to vote anymore. There's nothing left to argue about. It's yours. All of it. Sell the house, split it, do whatever you want with it. I don't need it anymore." "Dad, what are you talking about? I'm giving you exactly what you asked for," I said, and I stood up, and for the first time in 2 months my hands weren't shaking. "You wanted to decide if I still belonged here. I've decided for you. I don't." Carol's face had gone the color of ash. "Frank, you can't be serious. It's Christmas. And I've never been more serious in my life, Carol," I said. "I hope this makes you all happy. I really do. I hope it was worth it. I hope it was worth it." I picked up the small duffel bag I'd packed and hidden in the hall closet a week earlier, walked past every stunned face in that living room, and let myself out the front door into the cold. I didn't look back. I heard Daniel shouting my name behind me, heard footsteps on the porch, but I kept walking to the end of the driveway where I'd already arranged for a cab to be waiting, and I got in, and I gave the driver an address on the other side of the county. The address belonged to a machine shop owned by a man named Walt Higgins, who I'd known since we were 19 years old working the same line at a plant that doesn't exist anymore. Walt never had money and never wanted mine. He was just an honest man who fixed things for a living, and when I showed up on his doorstep on Christmas afternoon with a duffel bag and nowhere else to go, he didn't ask a single question. He just opened the door. "John, I mean Frank," he corrected himself, because he'd always had trouble with my name being the same as his brother's. "What in God's name happened to you?" I told him everything. The vote, the bowl, the papers. He shook his head slowly and said the kindest thing anyone had said to me in months. "Those people don't deserve the man standing in front of me." "I don't want anything from you, Walt," I said. "I just want to work. I want to be useful again." He had a cot in the back office and more work than he could handle. "68 or not," he said, "you still know your way around an engine better than half the kids I hire. Stay as long as you need." That was 6 years ago. 6 years I lived in the back room of Walt's shop, sleeping on that cot, waking at 5 every morning to the smell of motor oil and cold coffee, putting on coveralls and going to work like I hadn't spent 40 years running a household and raising a family that ultimately decided I was disposable. I rebuilt transmissions. I rewired old trucks that should have been scrapped a decade earlier. I taught 2 younger guys Walt hired how to actually listen to an engine instead of just running a diagnostic. It wasn't the life I had built for myself, but it was mine, entirely mine, and nobody in that shop ever once asked me to justify my right to exist in it. I never called my family. Not once. In 6 years. I heard things secondhand, through mutual friends, through the occasional letter that showed up at Walt's shop that I never opened. I knew Daniel's business had hit trouble. I knew Rachel had gotten divorced. I didn't let myself feel anything about it. I had given them everything I owned. What they did with it, and with themselves, was no longer my business. 1000. Then, about a month ago, on an ordinary Tuesday, the bell over the shop door rang while I had my head under the hood of a rusted-out Silverado. I didn't look up right away. Walt usually handled walk-ins by then, since I preferred the quiet of the bay. But Walt was out on a parts run, and the voice that called out, "Hello? I've got a car making a bad noise. Can somebody take a look?" hit something in me before I even registered why. I slid out from under the truck, wiping the grease off my hands, and stood up to find my son Daniel standing in the doorway of the shop, older than I remembered, gray threading through his hair now, dressed in a suit that looked expensive but hung wrong on him, like he'd lost weight he didn't mean to lose. He looked at me the way you'd look at a ghost. "Dad?" he whispered. The keys slipped out of his hand and hit the concrete floor. "Dad, is that really you?" I didn't answer right away. I just stood there, an old man covered in grease, looking at the son who had once handed me a folder full of paperwork about my own irrelevance. He crossed the shop floor fast, and before I could say a word he had his arms around me, sobbing into my shoulder like he was 7 years old again. "Dad, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. We were wrong. We were so wrong. We didn't know what happened to you. We tried. Let go of me, Daniel," I said, and my voice came out harder than I expected. He stepped back, wiping his face with the back of his hand, and that's when I noticed how tired he looked. Not just Christmas tired. Ears. Tired. "Why are you here?" I asked. "It's Mom," he said, and his voice broke completely. "She's sick, Dad. She's dying. It's her heart, it's failing, and they don't think she has long, and she asks for you every single day. She won't stop asking. Please, Dad, please come see her." 6 years I had waited, without knowing I was waiting, for a moment like this, for them to come find me, to beg, to finally understand what they'd done. I used to imagine, in the early nights on that cot, walking back through that door with my head high while they apologized. I thought it would feel like winning, but it didn't feel like anything except sad. "Get up off the floor," I told him, because he'd sunk to his knees without me even noticing. He stood, unsteady. "Why do you even want me back?" I asked. "You have the house. You have everything I gave you." "It's not the same, Dad," he said. "It was never the same. The house has been quiet for 6 years. Mom cries every night. Rachel's marriage fell apart the year after you left. She says she couldn't watch what we did to you and still believe in what a family's supposed to be. We destroyed ourselves the same week we thought we were protecting ourselves. We were so stupid, Dad. We were so scared of getting older and losing control that we took it out on you instead." I looked over at Walt, who'd come back in during all this and was standing quietly by the parts counter, giving me a small nod, the kind that said this might be your only chance, Frank. "I can't forgive what happened in that living room," I told Daniel. "I don't think I ever will, not all the way. But I loved your mother for 41 years, and I'll go see her. Not for you, for her." End quote. The drive to the house was silent. Daniel didn't try to fill it with excuses this time, and I was grateful for that. When we pulled up, the house looked smaller than I remembered, the paint peeling near the gutters, the lawn overgrown in patches. It looked like a place that had stopped being lived in, even though people still slept there. Inside, there was a hospital bed set up in the living room, right where the Christmas tree used to stand. Carol lay there small and pale, a shadow of the woman who used to run that whole household like a general, and when she opened her eyes and saw me standing in the doorway, she started to cry before I'd even said a word. "Frank," she breathed. "You came." I walked over and sat beside her, and I took her hand, thin and cool in mine, and I said, "I'm here, Carol." "I'm so sorry," she said, "for the vote, for not standing up for you. I was so scared of losing the kids' approval that I forgot I was losing you instead. I lost you either way, didn't I?" "Ah, it's all right," I said, and I meant it more than I expected to. "It's not all right," she whispered. "It will never be all right. But I need you to know I never stopped loving you, even after everything. Can you forgive me, Frank?" I looked around that living room, at Rachel standing by the window with her arms wrapped around herself, at Daniel in the doorway with his eyes red, at my grandchildren, taller now, quieter now, watching from the hallway. I understood, in that moment, that the forgiveness wasn't really for them at all. It was the only way I was ever going to be able to breathe easy again myself. "I forgive you," I told her, and something in my chest, some knot I'd been carrying for 6 years, finally loosened. End quote. End quote. End quote. I stayed at the house that week. I sat with Carol every night, holding her hand while she slept, and 11 days later she passed quietly in the early morning with my hand still wrapped around hers, just like I'd promised her 41 years before in a hospital hallway when we were young and had no idea what life had waiting for us. After the funeral, the family gathered at the house, and they asked me to stay. Daniel asked. Rachel asked, crying. My grandchildren asked. They said they'd do things differently this time, that there'd be no more votes, no more folders, no more deciding what an old man deserved. I told them no. "I'm not the man who left this house 6 years ago," I said, "and I'm not the man who's walking back through that door tonight either. I built something at Walt's shop that's mine. Nobody gets to vote on it. Nobody gets to take it from me. That's my home now." "But this is where you belong, Dad," Rachel said. "Home isn't an address," I told her. "It's wherever somebody values you without conditions." For 6 years, that's been a machine shop smelling like motor oil, and I earned every ounce of respect I get there. That's worth more to me now than any house. I thought that would be the end of it. I went back to Walt's, back to the cot, back to the quiet mornings and honest work. But a few weeks later, the bell over the shop door rang again, and this time it wasn't just Daniel. Rachel came. Tyler came. My grandkids, Ben and Ava, came. Both of them taller and older, and I noticed, unable to look me in the eye at first out of shame. Daniel was holding a folder again. The sight of it made something in my stomach clench, but this time when he handed it to me, it was every document I'd signed away that Christmas morning 6 years earlier. The deed, the accounts, all of it, transferred back. "We don't want it, Dad," Daniel said. "We never should have taken it in the first place. It's yours. It's always been yours." I looked at the papers in my hand, and I thought about how strange it was to be given back the very thing that had once been used to prove I didn't matter. "I don't want the house," I told them, and I watched the surprise ripple across their faces. "I have a home, in plays. I have a home. It's got oil stains on the floor, and a busted heater and Walt snoring in the next room, but it's mine, and nobody in it has ever once asked me to justify my place there." Rachel wiped her eyes and said, "Then we'll come to you. We'll bring Christmas here." So we did. That December, we had Christmas in Walt Higgins's machine shop, string lights wrapped around a tire rack, a folding table set up between 2 lifts, turkey served on paper plates because nobody could find enough real ones. It wasn't elegant. It wasn't the Christmas of the big house with the grand tree. But it was honest, every second of it, and when my grandson Ben laughed so hard at something Walt said that he nearly knocked over a toolbox, I felt something settle in my chest that I hadn't felt in 6 years. Family, I've come to understand, was never about the house or the deed or who has the biggest say around a dinner table. It's about who shows up when there's nothing left to gain from showing up. My family showed up in a garage that smelled like diesel and asked for nothing but the chance to sit beside me again. That was worth more than any folder full of paperwork ever could be. I think about that October afternoon sometimes, the bowl from our honeymoon full of folded ballots, the 4 minutes I spent waiting to hear whether my own family thought I deserved to keep existing in the life I'd built. I don't regret leaving. I don't regret giving away everything I owned. If I hadn't, I never would have learned what I was actually worth, separate from any house or bank account, which is to say, I never would have learned that my worth was never something anyone else had the right to weigh in the first place. Carol's gone now, but some nights I swear I can still feel her hand in mine the way it felt those last 11 days. And I know, wherever she is, she's proud that I finally stood up for the man she married, instead of letting myself become a line on somebody else's ledger. If there's one thing I'd want anybody listening to this to carry with them, it's this: never let another person put your worth up for a vote. Not your children, not your spouse, not anybody. First, what you're worth was decided the moment you were born, and it was never anybody else's to decide again. The shop is quiet tonight. Snow's falling outside the bay doors, catching the string lights Walt still hasn't taken down from last Christmas. My grandkids left an hour ago, promising to come back next weekend. Daniel's out front arguing with Walt about the right way to season a turkey, same as he does every year now. And I'm sitting here on an overturned bucket, listening to the people I love laugh in a place that used to be nothing but a stranger's garage, thinking that I never went home again. I built a new one instead. And that, I've decided, was the best revenge of all.